Sharing the screen. So, we were halfway through the social influence. So, can you hear me? Am I clear? Anyone? Can you please just let me know?
Yes, sir.
Fine. So this is Stanley Milgram. So he is famous for, like Solomon Asch is famous for his conformity experiment. There are a lot of classic experiments with which the scientists are connected. Stanley Milgram is associated with the shock experiment, the shock mission experiment, which is often quoted in concept of obedience, aggression, and things like that. How the system or the social roles can make you do things which otherwise you won't do, antisocial behaviors and things like that. So Stanley Milgram's, this is the pseudo mission, which was not an actual shock delivering mission. It's called the Milgram shock mission, shock experiment. And you know this in this thing, many people, of course, the person who is taking as a research participant is assigned the role of the teacher, and research confederate or a research assistant would be acting as the student who would be trying to give correct answers or making mistakes in that. And if they make mistakes, it's camouflaged as a learning memory experiment. And you're supposed to give shock. And of course, as a punishment, if they make errors, if the student make errors, so the teacher would be supposed to keep increasing the voltage from 15, and it can go all the way up to 450. You cannot go back. There's every subsequent mistake you have to keep increasing. That's how it goes. And again, 65% of people reached 450 volts. And this happened even if earlier voltages, when the student started acting, giving, the impression that he or she is having pain and they have fallen unconscious. Still, of course, it's not like that all the people who took part of the experiment were very happily doing this thing. They were very anxious, they were worried, they were showing reluctance, they were asking, is it right? Should I go ahead? Should we check that person? We were shouting, I don't hear any response. So should we help that person? All those things were there. But still, when the researcher politely says, no, you have to go ahead, don't worry about it. We have all taken that into consideration. All those kind of things, then 65% of the people went ahead. That's what happened. So he found out through making variations in the experiment, a lot of things. What he found out, if the experimental research is standing close by, then you are under greater pressure of obedience rather than if no researcher is present there. And if that person is wearing a lab coat and looks like a old professor, and things like that, then you're more likely to obey. If you're taken through like 15, 30, 40, like that, slowly, it's easy to reach to 450 rather than saying, directly go to 450. Sometimes the opposite thing also happens. Sudden order, before you could think and process it properly, also sometimes is destructive obedience. And the other things, like closer contact with the learner. For example, if you are very closely placed to that person to whom you think the wire is connected and shock is being delivered, or you help putting the wire around that person's finger and things like that, that empathy is formed. And it's much more difficult. That's why, when you're operating a drone, you don't feel guilt or you don't feel that kind of connection to somebody whom you may bomb from kilometers away. Anyway, so close contact with learner reduce the destructive obedience. And even if one person, sorry to miss this, anyway, I'll finish this and go back to that. If there is anybody who says no, you see somebody saying no, then the obedience pressure dramatically comes down. Similarly, in conformity experiment, in some experiments, what Solomon Asch did is keep a dissenter. That person will tell the right answer. Sometimes he made the dissenter tell the other wrong answer. Instead of the middle line, the more longer one, that is also wrong. The shorter one, that is also wrong. This dissenter, say for example, everybody is telling the longer one. And this dissenter is telling the shortest one, which is also wrong answer. But even if there is one person dissents from the others and tells a different answer, even that answer tends to be wrong, it dramatically reduces the conformity pressure. Okay. This is the Stanford. So I just thought of showing some pictures. This is, I think, from the original photographs. Stanford experiment where some students were randomly assigned to be prisoners, and everything was simulated. They created a prison under the basement of Stanford University. They created the arrests in public view, all those things. And randomly, people are assigned to the prisoner group, and randomly, some people were assigned to the jailers group. This is the prisoners group, so they were all given numbers, they were given these white uniforms, the individuality was taken away and things like that. This is a movie which was based on this Stanford prison experiment. There were many documentaries, movies inspired by this experiment. Das Experiment is a German movie. The Experiment is a Hollywood version of that. If you are having time, you could check out all these movies. It shows it's a very classic kind of thing. You should not remember this guy, Zimbardo, a very popular speaker. Zimbardo was the person who was behind the Stanford prison experiment, which is related to the Stanley Milgram's in one way because of the obedience. And obedience because you take the role to obey commands. Okay. In this also, people randomly assigned to the prisoner, I mean, jailers, they became, power hungry, and they started abusing. Even though it was not very explicitly ordered to do. The social role make you an evil person or make you indulge in antisocial behavior. So Zimbardo highlighted it through his Stanford prison experiment. Milgram showed it through the shock experiment. And similarly, the philosopher Hannah Arendt also has talked about this through the concept of banality of the evil. Anyway, so Zimbardo talks about this Lucifer effect, where very normal people can become evil when they are put under certain social roles, when they are made part of a wrong system. If the system is corrupted, the system is forcing you. So in fact, he recently testified in the US courts with regard to the Abu Ghraib prison, tortures and things like that. I think I have the picture here. So Zimbardo was the one who talked about all these things. So let's remember these phases so that, it's easy to connect the concepts, experiments with the actual experimenters. So that's it. Now moving on to the change of attitude within the cultures. Let me speed it up. So here, I'll just highlight whatever is highlighted. I will tell that and move on. Okay. Basically, the idea is, if it is individualistic culture, your persuasive messages should be framed in such a way, appealing to the individual's ambitions and things like that. But as a collectivistic culture, you should talk about, do you want to be a good mother, or do you want to make your family proud? That's the way the persuasive message has to go. Basically, there are theories like theory of recent action and theory of planned behavior. We'll talk about that later. In both these theories, there's a concept called subjective norm. Subjective norm is whenever you want to do something, when you're thinking about the attitude towards a thing, or when you are having an intention to do a behavior, you'll think about what others will think. In collectivistic culture, what others will think is given greater weightage. Then research shows that individualist culture people have more dissonance than collectivistic people, because here the you is separate, and in collectivism, more often you won't be doing what you want to do. It's others' wishes and other kind of things. But in individualistic culture, you will do what you want to do. So whenever you are doing, or somebody is forcing you to do, or somebody points out that your behavior is not in line with your attitude, you will feel more dissonance. Individualists will feel more dissonance. Then, but as I said earlier, in collectivistic culture, the interdependent self is threatened. Then they may also feel cognitive dissonance, similar to what I discussed in reactance. Then if you look at people with, this is a combination of Hofstede's thing, control of uncertainty. Collectivistic culture, people don't want uncertainty. There is a strong power distance, that is strong hierarchy, collectivism. In these things, the peripheral clues, which we discussed in Yale approach, they are more important. the peripheral route clues, they are more powerful. But when it comes to individualistic culture, where there is a poor power distance, people don't mind about uncertainty. There, the strength of the argument, what will go through the central route, that is more powerful. And threat, fear-based persuasion will generally work better with collectivists. But again, there's a difference. Individual physical, losses are highlighted. That will work better in individualistic culture. And if you say that your family will suffer, your children will suffer, when you are always trying to when the losses are suffered by other people, that's why it's called moral pain. Moral pain is not only to you, some kind of injustice happening to near and dear ones of you. That is more important, collective culture. So the persuasive message should be focused on such kind of things only will work in collectivistic culture. We discussed about the 6 principles of compliance. In general, whether you are from collectivistic culture or individualistic culture, commitment, reciprocity, liking works. With individualistic culture, scarcity works better. With collectivistic culture, authority and consensus works better, because consensus, what others do, like social validation, what others do, you will more likely to fall for that pressure because you are coming from a collectivistic culture. Authority, again, high power distance, you have to obey the authority. That is why in collectivistic, authority and consensus works better. In individualistic culture, scarcity works better. Then you have descriptive norms. Descriptive norms is more powerful with collectivism. I have already talked about, when we discussed conformity, I talked about the power of descriptive norms. That's much more powerful in collectivistic culture than in individualistic culture. We are done with this. Then let me rush through the other PowerPoint slides before we go for things. I told you I will discuss peer pressure, and I will discuss what else is left? Social power. Okay. We'll discuss social power and then move on to peer pressure. So social power is nothing but power, the concept of power. Ability to influence, the potential to influence others' emotions, others' behavior, others' attitudes, others' values, other thoughts is called power or social power. Because it comes from other person, that's why it's called social. Power is always social. And how do you do it? That is social influence, social persuasion, peer pressure. All these things are techniques which enable use of social power so that other people's behavior or ideas changes. Okay. One of the most famous classification of power, types of power, is given by French and Raven and French. So you have reward power, your ability to reward somebody. That means you are able to give them job, you are able to give them money, something like that. Through that, others may obey you, or you may be able to make them change their behavior or attitude. That is reward power. Coercive power is because you have the power to punish. Okay, you can whip them, you can kill them or something like that. Coercive power. Then legitimate power, you occupy a position which gives you all these powers. It's official position because of he or she is your boss. So legitimate power, because of that also you could bring about changes in others. Referent power is where you are charismatic, you are likable, you have established a bonding, emotional bonding with other person. Because of that, people who are high in emotional and social, and leaders who are high in emotional and social intelligence usually have this referent power. You like them. You obey them because you like them. That's referent power. Expert power is you accept whatever they have asked you to do because you know that they are experts in that field. Knowledge. You hold power over the other person because of your expertise and knowledge. That's expert power. And normally, power tactics. There are a lot more, but we will keep it simple. If I have to influence somebody, I may use different techniques. Apart from these types, these are sources of power. But what strategy I may use? One thing is reason, logic. I'll clearly say that, see, you are a new employee. You are on a temporary contract. If you do this project properly, you have a greater possibility of getting promoted. I'm placing the facts in front of that person. Okay, nothing more. I'm just putting all the facts as they are. I am then making that person do something. So that is reason. Friendliness, like ingratiation, friendliness, which we talked about under complaints. You build a relationship, and a friend will listen to what you are asking that person to do. Coalition, you always try to gang up against someone. You have friends in other places and use the power of the group, that is coalition. Bargaining is always some kind of compromise. I give you this. Can you give me this? That is also a way of influencing other people, whereby you are using power. Assertiveness. So power doesn't need to be always negative and threatening. It could be always based on friendliness. It could be based on give and take, compromises. Assertiveness, repeatedly putting the request, not wavering from it, reminding again and again, something like that. Or if somebody asks you, or clearly, unwaveringly saying no, assertiveness. That is also one way where you could influence other people. Higher authority, you report to the boss, you put the complaint to some authority, court, something like that. Then sanctions. That is official power of sanctions you use, punishments and things like that. These are different techniques. Usually this is talked about in organizational context. Whenever we talk about power, we need to talk about why some people tend to get corrupted by power. So David Kipnis has observed that whenever I have power and somebody doesn't have power, and I'm able to make changes in other person's behavior, the information that I get from that person's behavior is that person does not have control over his or her own behavior. Therefore, they are less likely deserving of respect. Okay, and therefore I could exploit them. This is how it gets into your head slowly. When you have power, not only you feel I have the power and choice to do whatever I want. The other person does not have that kind of degrees of freedom, and therefore you see them as less worthwhile and more worthy to be exploited. Okay, that is one idea. Serena Chen is a researcher who says that, see, the power can be used for selfish needs or social needs, for the larger needs. So social power can always be channelized by self-oriented people towards their own benefits, and other oriented people will channelize it toward the organizational goals or the societal goals. That's it. So shifting on to peer pressure. Where is it? It's already open. Yeah, here it is. So we have peer pressure. So we all have heard about this concept. Peers are those people who share our age or status or educational qualification or occupation, who are kind of equals. That's why we call them as peers. And the pressure of social influence, the pressure of social persuasion can come from our peers. So peers, the relationship is basically non-hierarchical. This peer pressure can be offline, can happen online, can be explicit. Somebody can explicitly ask you, why are you not doing this? We are all going for that, you should also come. Or it could be subtle, indirect, people could laugh at you, ignore you, could be implicit without putting an explicit request or an order. Whatever we discussed, all those things can be employed by your peers on you to bring about changes in your attitude and behavior. Peer pressure, usually we have a negative connotation. We always think about people using drugs or indulging in crimes because of peer pressure. It could be positive too. It could be positive too. And until 5 years of age, this peer pressure doesn't work that much. But slowly after that, the peer pressure keeps increasing. The adolescent, it peaks. Of course, it's high comparatively later stages, but it's not as high as it is in adolescence. That is the time when you are neither a child nor an adult, that kind of situation. So peer pressure is very high. Peer pressure probably will be a very important factor in the Erik Erikson stages of psychosocial development, in that identity formation versus role confusion stage. Then things like gender roles, playing the gender roles properly, trying out drugs, indulging in small crimes, whether you are studying properly or not, all these things can be influenced by peer pressure. Peer groups, are like any other groups. They give you certain things. They give you social support. They give you a place where you could discuss taboo topics. They give you a sense of belonging. They give you an identity. They give you a sense of purpose. There is a belief structure that binds you all. There is a system of rules and norms. All these things always attracts you to the groups, so that puts a pressure on you. Then, as I told you earlier, attitude inoculation has been used by William McGuire particularly targeting the adolescents to resist peer pressure against smoking. And there is a theory called identity shift effect by Wendy Trainer. It's a very interesting theory that talks about how peer pressure, how it works. So what happens is, see, when I'm different from my peer group, there is an external conflict because I am outside the group. I want to be part of the group, but I'm different. I'm not like them. My norms and my behavior, my ways of dressing are all different. So there's an external conflict. So what do? I resolve this external conflict. So I do as they do. I dress as they do. I resolve the external conflict. But this leads to another conflict called internal conflict because this is not the real me. I just want to join the group, so I made some changes. To resolve the conflict, I joined. Now you have the internal conflict. What you could do, he says, Wendy Trainer says that individuals genuinely bring about a change inside them. That is, they make these changes as their own changes, not just changes to get into a group, but they start believing these norms, these behaviors, these beliefs. So the internal conflict is also resolved. So identity shift has happened to resolve these external and internal conflicts. So this is, these are the PowerPoints. So we will try out this mnemonic quiz and then go to the some question discussion, then probably run through the previous year questions. No, the terms, the terms, technical terms related to it. I want you to interact. Okay. So, yeah, I just need a name of a scientist. So please switch on your mic and tell what comes to your mind. If you want clues, I'll give you a clue. The picture of soldier represents World War. This is a university logo. That is Aristotle. I just want a psychologist's name. Anybody? This is Yale University logo. The psychologist worked US military as an expert. He modeled his original theory on Aristotle. Can you give me the name? Try it, please. You are all psychology students, not freshers. Give me some name. Don't worry about it.
Milgram.
Not Milgram. Any other name? Okay. Shortage of time. I'm going to the answer. So this is the next. This is the thing. Carl Hovland is the person, who was recruited by U.S. Army to understand, to motivate the soldiers, and he did a lot of studies related to that. And a lot of his concepts and theories developed out of that work he did with the U.S. Army. And he, until his death, this guy, Carl Hovland, means Yale University. Yale University means Carl Hovland. He was so connected to this university. Until his last few days, he died of cancer. Until his last days, he was working. He was working with his students. He was doing research, and there is a theory by Aristotle. What he says, whenever communication, there are three things: pathos, ethos, logos. Logos is the logic, the content of the message. Ethos is the how you deliver the message and things like. Pathos is the emotional aspect that you have to take care of. Ethos is the ethical principles and things like that. So based on that only, that three things: source, message, and audience. That idea, he got it from Aristotle. He applied it to the Yale University logo. So social persuasion, Carl Hovland, Yale approach. Going to the next one. Who is this guy? On right, this 1934 earthquake that happened in India and Nepal. There is a picture. There's a picture of a scientist. And below, there is $1.20. So $1, $20. Who is this scientist? Any name? It is said that the scientist developed his theory when he read about this 1934 Indian earthquake. Then only, he came to this conclusion. So, who is this guy? Okay, I'll tell you this $1, $20. Do you remember this experiment? His co-researcher was Carl Smith. They paid people to lie about their experience to others waiting outside that the activity was fun, and they were paid $1. Some people were paid $20 to tell a lie that they had a great fun-filled experience in the lab. Are you able to get it? Yes. Okay. I think you guys are shy. So this is Leon Festinger, his cognitive dissonance theory. When he read about this earthquake and he found out that there was rumors of more and more earthquakes and people were believing it even though they were not directly affected, or there was no proof that more earthquakes are in the line. He said that when people had this fear, they were experiencing dissonance because they did not have any. I mean, those people who are not affected by this, those people should not be afraid, but they were afraid. This created dissonance, and therefore they started justifying the fear by believing in this rumor. That's how this cognitive dissonance theory took shape. Then only this Carl Smith experiment, people who were paid $1 to lie experienced dissonance. People who were paid $20 to tell a lie did not experience dissonance because there was clear justification why they lied to others. For the money I lied, so no dissonance. There was a clear explanation. $1, they need not. They invariably they would have got $1. They still lied. So those people felt more dissonance, and this led to the concept of less leads to more effect. So less leads to more effect is when you are just enough persuaded to indulge in counter-attitudinal behavior, what we call as forced compliance, and you believe that you had a choice either to do this or that, and you take responsibility for the consequences, and you also believe that $1 was not a bribe, and all those kind of things. Then you undergo dissonance, and of course, then you will deal with dissonance. We'll discuss about that later. Today, I have not specifically taken about cognitive dissonance, but dissonance, you could deal it by trivializing it, by changing the attitude, or by changing the behavior, or justifying the discrepancy. Okay, so that is Leon Festinger and cognitive dissonance. Okay, I need the name of a scientist or the concept. Only when you start interacting, it will be fun. Otherwise, I will abandon this method. But I believe this method, if you use properly, it would retain things in the memory better. Yes? Give me some hope. Come on, any one of you. I need the name of a scientist or a concept given by that scientist. Anything. Yes? Any one of you? Okay, today I think only I am earning all the points. Because of lack of time, I'm rushing through. Next time, I'm not going to leave you like this. Okay, so this is William J. McGuire, the 6-step model of social persuasion. We discussed about that 6 steps: exposure, attention, comprehension, acceptance, retention, and action. Okay, so that is the EAC, ARA, the 6-step persuasion model. It takes the social persuasion takes place in steps and stages. Then he was the one who talked about the stress inoculation, like the vaccine kind of model, to curb the smoking habits in youngsters. So William J. McGuire. Okay, now give me the concept or the name of the person. Hope you understand the picture. You have urged to press it when there is a do not press. The fish most probably would have bitten this bait. That person attraction towards a cake is increasing because the person is not able to reach it.
So the slide is not changed.
Pardon me?
The slide is not changed.
Is it so? For everyone? I can see the slide here.
No, it's visible, sir.
Visible?
Yeah.
Probably the bandwidth issues on your side will slightly get delayed, but I think others people can see it. Okay, so today, my bad. This is reactance. Whenever somebody prevents you or puts you in a position that you cannot do something what you want to do, you feel reactance. When they prevent you from doing something or when they are forcing you to do something which you don't want to do, whatever, it creates reactance. It's a negative state. We want to restore the freedom. So this Jack Brem, he gave this reactance concept. Okay, give me the concept. I think with my experience of the previous questions, I'm not expecting an answer. This is Triumph of the Will by Lenin. This is Nazi propaganda films. This is Frank Capra making similar propaganda movies during World War II for the Americans or the Allied forces. So I'll give you the answer. This Carl Hovland was doing research on these things too, and he found out something very unique called sleeper effect. We discussed about it. So you forget the source, and just because you forget the source, the persuasive power of the message increases. Okay, actually, Hovland, Lundstein, Sheffield, all these people only discovered the sleeper effect. So a persuasive message over a period of time, because you forget the source where you got this message, because of the forgetting of that, it is having a greater persuasive power. That is what we call sleeper effect. Can you make any sense of this picture? A guy on the right and drink Coca-Cola, eat popcorn. What am I talking about? This happened in 1957. Later they found out that whatever this issue is, it was a lie. It was a spam. It was a scam, whatever. This is James Vicari. He suddenly one day told that I did a research and I was able to persuade people subliminally. So he said he projected these words, drink Coca-Cola, eat popcorn, in movie theaters. Nobody could have perceived it because it's less than a second, it's so fast. So subliminal presentation. And he said that the sales of Coca-Cola and popcorn increased. Later on, he said this is a marketing stunt I did. And nothing of that sort I did. But later on, this triggered subliminal persuasion research. This last slide. Just want to put some names related to Yale School. Carl Hovland, of course. Irving Janis is one of his students whom we always associated with groupthink. Muzaffar Sharif. See, these kind of approaches I do because things are highly connected. And in a MCQ, you don't need to even know the exact answer. You could eliminate and reach the answer. And for that, even if you know a little bit related information, you could arrive at the right answer. So Muzaffar Sharif, we always associate him with, there is something called social judgment theory. I told you, I discussed that. Based on your prior opinion or prior belief, you listen to the persuasive message or you ignore the persuasive message. Sharif is also known for the realistic conflict theory, the robber cave experiment, which we will discuss later on. McGuire we just discussed. So that's it. Moving on to the questions. Where is the question? Most of them are previous questions, but some of them I just added. Not every question is related to what we discussed today. But anyway, since you're all exposed to these things, you're not a stranger to all these things. This 2018 question, I believe. Assertion reasoning. So assertion says that rational persuasion refers to the use of logical arguments and facts to persuade others for achieving a desired result. Reason says that managers use several techniques to influence others in organization. So what would be the answer? There's an assertion, that is reason. Can anyone attempt? today, just for the demo purpose, I will wind up with 5 questions and then move on to the terminology revision. Okay. So somebody try it. Nobody wants to try. Is the first one correct? At least tell me that. Is the first one correct? Yes. Tell me. Okay. Well, let's see. I think we need to get to each other and
Sir,
get
assertion
acquainted.
is correct, I think. Rational persuasion.
So what would be the choice, the answer, the code, which you would take? 1, 2, 3, 4, which one? Yeah.
It's just a try, sir.
Yeah, of course.
Sir, R is correct. I mean,
R is correct. Okay. So B, I mean, you will take 2. No, you will take which one? R is true. 4. We'll take 4.
the rational persuasion means we use logical things
Yeah.
To achieve the desired result. That is correct.
Okay.
And, managers use several techniques to influence others in organization. So both are right, I think.
Both are right. So, so 1 or 2 from the code. So you have arrived here. Both A and R are 2. Both A and R are 2. So either 1 or
1.
Let's see what the answer is. Answer is 2 because I mean managers use techniques to influence. That's just a statement in itself. It is not trying to explain. Say for example, for the assertion, why we call rational persuasion, it's just a definition. No? Rational persuasion is the use of logical arguments.
Yeah.
There is nothing to explain there, first of all. And this is not an explanation. This is a standalone statement. Another correct statement. That's it. It's not connected. So both are correct, but R is not the explanation of. Second, actually, this is a error in the question and the error in the code given. So forget about the code. Leave the code. I want you to connect each one. Say conformity. Give me the definition from the right side thing. You have 1, 2, 3, 4. For conformity, what should be the right definition? Yes.
First one, sir.
First one.
Yeah.
No, sir. It is wherein individuals change their attitude to go along with the existing norm.
Exactly. So conformity is actually this one, norms. That is why I told you norms. So conformity is a social influence where norms are the source of power. Okay, let's go to complaints. What is complaints?
Mother, sir.
Yeah.
Request from other.
Which one?
Request from other.
Request from other. Yeah. So directly, whatever is there given straight ahead of it, that is exactly good. Social norms.
Rules indicating
How individuals are expected
And
to
intense coordination is the last.
behave in a
So
specific
no doubt about it. Moving on. Actually, the code given is wrong. Let's leave that. So Solomon Asch study. How many percentage of time people conform? That means told the wrong answer. Which would you select? If you remember, I told you 75%. Therefore, the answer should be
50, over 50.
exactly. Which of the following norms suggest people that they ought to behave? How people should behave? Which would accurately capture that definition to tell people how they should behave? Yes.
suggest people that they
Can anyone try? The answer is,
Responsibility,
pardon me?
social responsibility now.
Social responsibility is slightly, we have to take care of people who are less privileged than us, slightly higher. This is just telling you that how people have to behave. That's it, nothing more.
Prescriptive norms.
Prescriptive norms.
Prescriptive norms is the answer, because proscriptive norms tells what not to do. Prescriptive norms tells what to do. Reciprocity just says when somebody does this to you, you repay back. Social responsibility is we have to, well-off people should take care of the less well-off people, that kind of thing. So the answer is prescriptive norms. The last question, the psychological currency that permits deviation from the group. That means you don't need to conform to the group. You have a, currency means a leeway, a kind of luxury that you have, that you could go against what the group does, you could go against that, what it is called. I mean, guess it. If you do not know exactly also, you could eliminate certain things and come to the answer. Probably this should be the one.
Idiosyncrasy.
Idiosyncrasy credit. A credit is a kind of currency. This is something like, see, sometimes I agree with the group, then I earn money. Very good boy. Okay. Sometimes I go against a group, bad person. Okay, so I lose some money. So if I will lose some money, I will earn some money. So I need to have sufficient credit. If I have more money earned, and sometimes only I go away from it, then I could do that. That gives me a leeway to deviate from the group norms and still survive or escape from the group sanctions. That is idiosyncrasy credit. We'll discuss about it later. Okay, I'll wind up here, and I will go to the I'll just show you some terms. We will just go through them. I'll just read it out for you. So we have discussed central root of persuasion. Basically, when people focus on statistics, logic, facts, evidences, and things like that, when they process the information, that is called central root. Peripheral root is other than this thing, like attractiveness of the speaker and all the silly things, then it is called peripheral root. Cognitive dissonance, I told you the discomfort or tension when you get when there is incompatibility between different cognitive elements, and we will try to minimize it. It can be post-decisional dissonance or pre-decisional dissonance, like about to do something, that is pre-decisional dissonance. You feel that whatever you are going to do is in contradiction with your attitude or values. Post-decisional, once you have done it, when you reflect on it, you feel that your action is in discordant with the values or attitudes. Then you have collectivism, individualism, where the larger group, the family, the caste, the religion, the country, whatever, that is given more priority than the individual. Individualism, exactly opposite. The individual choices are relatively given more importance compared to that of the larger identity. Conformity, you know that, norms without explicit record, obedience from authority, getting a direct order, framing, how the issue is posed, how the statement is placed, or how the question is asked, and this can influence your opinions, your decision making, your persuasion abilities. Persuasion is changing of beliefs, attitudes, behaviors also, but primarily internal things. Reciprocity norm is where you help each other out. Sleeper effect is a delayed impact of a message that occurs. The message has an impact, but a delayed impact. Because initially it was discounted, it was not agreed to, but it becomes effective later because we forget the reason why we discounted it, because we forgot the source. That is what we call sleeper effect. Social comparison, we all do this. We will always compare ourselves with others. One of the reasons why we conform, why we comply, things like that. So social comparison is very important for forming your self-esteem and things like that. And social norms are the unwritten rules that guide your behavior. Door in the face, you start with a bigger request and scale it down so that you put a reciprocity principle on another person. Foot in the door is you start with a smaller request and then escalate the request into bigger requests. This is based on the consistency principle. Ingratiation is making yourself likable to the other person. This is based on the friendship principle of compliance according to Cialdini. Low balling is suddenly you say in the last minute, sorry, some more changes are there, which I didn't tell you earlier. And because of the consistency principle, somehow forcing the person to go with the original decision of yes. The need for uniqueness, some people have this high these people are highly resistant to persuasion. Idiosyncrasy credit, this was given by Edwin Hollander. So basically, I already explained it to you just now. It will help people see, even some leaders who have higher credit would be able to do something different, innovative. People will be tolerant of you because most of the time you have gone with the group's expectations and you have sufficient credit so that it allows you to be idiosyncratic. Okay, a credit that allows you to be idiosyncratic, to be unique and individualistic. Reactance, whenever your freedom was threatened, unpleasant feeling that comes as reactance, which drives you to re-establish that freedom. Reactance, when it happens, seeing others suffering this, others' freedom being taken away, and you have nothing to do with it, but you feel that is called vicarious reactance. Then theory of planned behavior, theory of recent action. Planned behavior was given by Fishbein and Atchison. Recent action was given by Atchison and Madden. Slight change was made. Theory of planned behavior, you have subjective norm, you have attitude towards the behavior. And in theory of recent action, the perceived behavioral control. Since I assume that you all know these theories, I'm just giving this information, that perceived behavioral control was added in the theory of the recent action. Theory of planned behavior, I did not have the theory of recent. It's exactly the opposite. I will check it out anyway. So usually these theories are put together, and the behavioral control is only the added one. We'll discuss about that later on. So today my class is over. I'll just take 2 minutes to say hi to you all before Mr. Muthu takes over. So yes, any feedback? Was it too fast? Was it too heavy? How did you feel the class? This is a kind of simulation of how we are going to do it in future also. Only the content might expand, the number of questions, the number of terms, all those things might increase or decrease, but this is a pattern, and because I would like to repeat the things in different forms, in pictures or as texts, related concepts and things. Yeah, anything to share with me? Okay. If there is nothing to share, over to Mr. Muthu. And I hope Muthu today would give you an overall picture of, the difficulty level, the pattern, how things have been going on, and what he would be doing. He would be giving you some ideas about the paper 1 and what he plans to do regarding that, and also paper 2, what he plans to do. And basically, I requested him to do a kind of analysis of what kind of questions, how much of things are repeating, all these things are repeating. Am I right?
Yes, sir.
Okay then. So I'm going to quit. So Muthu, you could record the session from your side. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Welcome. See you next week.
Thank
Thank you, sir.
Seeing same time. Bye then. So
Thank
over to Dr.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.